Okay, good morning, everyone. It could be good afternoon or good evening to those who join online with us today. And on behalf of the organizing team, CIB Task Group TG124, Net Zero Carbon Building Design and Construction, I would like to invite you all to this panel discussion on challenges and opportunities for net zero carbon practices in the construction industry. And I'm Niluka Domingo from School of Built Environment, West University, New Zealand. And I'm one of the task group coordinators. That is how I'm connected to this session, and hard work was done by Sepani and Srinath. It was fascinating to listen to all the speeches this morning about sustainable development goals and especially zero carbon, the speech by Australian Green Building Council. And I really hope that this discussion will advance what we have already listened this morning. So before moving to the panel discussion, let me first give a little bit of context to this session. Okay, so we have been discussing about sustainable development, sustainable construction, saving energy, saving water, conserving natural resources for many decades, like what we heard this morning too. But due to many reasons like urbanization, industrialization, population growth, and recently it was recorded that the size of the human family is now 8 billion. And in the morning speech from Green Building Council, it is predicted to be 10 billion by 2050. So with all these things, so the climate change is already happening. And depending on where we live, the consequences we face may vary. For instance, some of you may be experiencing bushfires, whereas some of you may be experiencing floods and droughts, and some of you may be experiencing extreme hot and cold temperatures, and there are some countries that are at risk due to increasing sea levels. So likewise, this is already happening, and as a global response to this, at COP21 in Paris in 2015, 196 countries signed to this Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding international treaty on climate change, and it is actually a landmark in multilateral climate change response process, because it is for the first time that all countries agree to a common goal actually I would like to use the term ambitious goal to combat the climate change issues. And the idea is to maintain the increasing global temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius, or preferably not more than 1.5 Celsius for next 100 years. And so this Paris Agreement works in 5-year cycles. So in 2015, the nations agreed to submit their nationally determined contributions, which we call in short form NDCs, by 2020, and the idea was for developed countries to support developing countries to achieve their net zero carbon targets and face the issues due to climate change and to control them. So as a result, many countries in the world came up with different strategies, legislations, roadmaps, policies to achieve net zero goals. So as you can see here, most of the countries are planning to achieve net zero goals by 2050, but there are some countries who have more ambitious targets to be carbon zero before that. The countries marked in green are the ones who have already enforced to be carbon neutral through legislation. So Australia, if I'm correct, since I'm talking in front of a lot of Australians, I'm really nervous to say this, but Australia joined the board recently, according to my understanding, this year. They passed the Climate Change Act, and it looks a little bit more ambitious than the targets Australia had before. For instance, the previous target was to reduce carbon emissions by 26 to 28% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. But now they are moving to reduce it by 48% in 2030 and achieve zero carbon neutral by 2050. So with, however, having done all these things, according to the recently concluded COP27, the UN Secretary General mentioned that the greenhouse gas emissions is still keep rising and global temperature is still keep rising. And these are his exact words. He said that our planet is fast approaching a tipping point that will make climate chaos irreversible. And he said that we are on a highway to climate hell, and still our foot still on the accelerator. So we as construction industry, are we doing the right thing? Are we on the right track? So this is the main focus for today's discussion. According to statistics, construction industry is responsible for 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And this includes both operational and embodied carbon. And the recent publication on global status report for building and construction says that the building construction sector is not on track to achieve decarbonization by 2050. And it says that construction industry is horribly carbon unfriendly. And so that means we need to change. We need to change, and we need to be a little bit ambitious on what we want to achieve. Martin Luther King once said that if you can't fly, try to run. If you can't run, try to walk. If you can't walk, at least try to crawl. So what is important is that we keep moving forward. So we need to keep moving forward, but to the right direction. So to keep moving forward to the right direction, we need to know what are the obstacles and what are the opportunities along the way. So I'm very much looking forward to today's panel discussion on opportunities and challenges to achieve net zero carbon in the construction industry. Before introducing the panel, I would like to invite Associate Professor Sekwani Srinaratna to give a little bit of introduction to the organizing team, which is CIB Task Group TG124. Thank you. And I hope you will enjoy the discussion.
Thanks, Niluka. I think we have a few more slides to explain the TG Task Group. So the TG coordinators are Niluka, myself, and there's one more, Professor Sam Wilkinson from the Massey University, who was unfortunately unable to join us today. We started this task group also with the mentorship of Srinath, and to move forward. So the aim of our task group was, obviously, you all understand from the keynote stage today, it's the need for people to bring together and lead construction industry and other bodies to internationally debate and research and reduce global construction emissions. So with that aim, we introduce a new task group for CIB. I hope you all know what CIB is. That's a large international network of more construction-based researchers spread throughout the world. So our task group is on net zero carbon, and we have these themes. As you could see, it's a very large scope. There's much we can do in this space, so we just want to prioritize some things. To start with, we have 4 main themes in this task group, which is create a global carbon taxonomy. We know many different countries have different terminologies, concepts. We talk about zero carbon, net zero carbon, carbon positive, and so many other terms. So we just want to identify what each of these means and what are the contextual factors of these different countries and the policies guidelines. So we have started some research around that area, and we will be doing a bit more activities around this, which will be coming up in the next slide. And the next priority theme is on looking at design and construction practices in construction towards net zero, especially looking at material selection and methods used and other life cycle cost and life cycle assessment considerations. And the third one is on looking at digital and innovative technologies around this theme. We know, like some of us at the center has already started work on blockchain, how it can help in calculating, especially maybe heard in the morning, the issues with different calculations on embodied carbon. So we are trying to look at how to come up with accurate calculations using technologies such as blockchain, and then there's carbon trading platforms. We have many platforms around, but is there anyone specific to construction? So we are going to look into these aspects, and carbon estimating tools and circular economy as one other emerging thing. And the fourth one is creating education and awareness around this, especially international seminars, and this one is one of them. So we will be having many more in the coming 3 years, and student shop activities and publications. So these are the themes. And this is the 3-year plan, what we plan to do. We started this task group this year at the CIB World Congress in Melbourne last June. And it was also, there was a keynote from the president of CIB, Mark Hashtag, who also did a speech this morning through online. So he launched this for us, and then we have this today's panel discussion, which you all are waiting eagerly to listen to. And just talking about some work ahead, next year we are going to run a global survey, and we have several participants join this task group and who will be helping us with the survey, coordinating for each country. And there will be some conferences coming up. I think we are planning to have a conference along with AUBEA next year in New Zealand, in Melbourne University. And also there's some publications we plan for, like a special issue in BPAM, and I did a book on net zero carbon. And finally, to report all our activities and findings in 2025, CIB World Congress in Perth. All right, so those are the 3-year plan, and anyone interested who has not yet joined us and who can contribute to our group and those activities that we listed, you can still join us, and you can contact any of us through those emails and let us know. So that's about briefly about the TG task group, and to the most rated part of this session, that's the panel discussion. Let me invite the panel moderator, Professor Srinath Pereira. So Professor Srinath Pereira is the Professor of Built Environment and Construction Management here at Western Sydney, and also the Director of the Centre for Smart Modern Construction. So he has many specialties, research areas, and His sustainability research are more focused on carbon management, whole life costing, sustainable construction, and technologies around it. So he's also a mentor for the TG task group that I just mentioned, and also the co-chair of this AUBEA 22 conference. So what do you, Srima? Okay, so I'll be introducing the panel members as well. So to start with, we have where's George Chapa joining online. So once we stop screen sharing, you can see him. So George Chapa is the head of market transformation in Green Building Council of Australia. He's the chair of World GBC's Global Commitment for Net Zero Carbon Buildings Task Force. He's also a member of Climate Bonds Initiative Building Standards and Working Group, the Australian Sustainable Finance Initiative's Technical Advisory Group, and GRESB's Real Estate Standards Committee. So we will soon see him once we stop sharing the screen. So he will be joining us online. Unfortunately, he has got COVID and he cannot make it face-to-face today. So Joe Carter is our next panel member. And so I warmly welcome him to come to the stage and take a seat. And Joe is the head of sustainability and social impact for BILT. BILT is one of the largest construction companies in Australia. So he's the specialist in Green Star, WELL, and NABERS certification and peer review, circular economy, net zero carbon, and LEED certifications. With his national and international experience in sustainable design and construction methods, he contributes to the proliferation of sustainability throughout the built environment. So our next panelist is Uli Dimanji from KPMG. So he's the product manager for KPMG Origins, Built Environment, Sustainability Product, Asset and Impact. Uli has experience working in the development and implementation of sustainability strategies to help reduce carbon emissions from buildings, from design through to delivery and operation. Is currently leading the product roadmap for asset impact to ensure it continues to be a trusted way to measure, benchmark, and report built environment sustainability metrics. Warmly welcome Uli to come and take a seat to lead the panel discussion. And from also we have Professor Chaparan Gajendran. So Gajendran is the Assistant Dean, Education College of Engineering, Science and Environment at University of Newcastle. His research focuses on the sociological aspects associated with built environment in the context of construction project disaster management. And currently he is leading a research initiative on net zero carbon. So it's very timely to have him also in the panel. So please welcome Gajendran as well. So over to you, Srinath, to lead the
see the camera. Yes, yeah. Thank you, Sivani. I think everyone heard about the TG124. TG124 started from Massey with the idea coming from Veluka about doing net zero. And when she consulted me, I thought that would be a brilliant idea because there wasn't anything on CIB looking at net zero in particular, and it is one of the most important, crucial elements of modern society. As Davina in her keynote earlier on pointed out, there is so much of aspects that needs to be considered. We need to bring all three elements, social, environmental, and economic sides of this equation back in together to create a net zero economy. So it is not one thing, it has many aspects. And then it is much more complicated by the fact that there are many industries that are there, as well as construction industry being one of the biggest contributors. 40% roughly comes from the construction sector. That is in terms of direct emissions. And if you take the embodied carbon elements, because buildings, if you talk about buildings and infrastructure together, all these are constructed elements, and if the embodied carbon in that is considered broadly, the emissions that do occur because of construction, because of infrastructure, because of buildings is even much more. So that's the indirect component I'm talking about that is there. So we have a great panel here, and I must therefore try to stick to our plan and go through the questions in. First question, George. George, can you hear us? Yeah, okay.
I can hear you very well.
Thanks, George, for joining in. First question is about government policies and strategies to drive net zero carbon initiative in the industry. What are your thoughts on the current government initiatives and especially focusing on the gaps in those?
Very happy to, and first of all, once again, apologies for not being there in person. I did end up testing positive from COVID about a week or so ago, and I didn't want to be coughing all over the wonderful panelists and yourself. So, with apologies. Broadly speaking, and what's funny, for what it's worth, complete sidetrack. I was actually with Joe over in Washington. I ended up getting COVID. He's not. He's safe. So you know, it's yeah, it's one of those things. So yeah, well, you know me, going around hugging everyone. That's what's happened. Broadly speaking, what's happening essentially, or what we're seeing is we're starting to see a lot of government entities look to actually really look at the many ways that we're going to have to make a net zero built environment. So we're starting to see policies like the City of Sydney that's putting out a net zero policy, or City of Melbourne that's also putting out a net zero policy, or the ACT government that's currently looking at getting rid of fossil fuels. And they're all actively now essentially starting to set a flag for sunsetting the use of fossil fuels in buildings. Voluntarily, Green Star has that requirement now for 6-star rated projects. It'll start kicking in for 5-star rated projects in January, and then it essentially takes over from 2026. And the reason for that is that getting rid of gas is important. Like, we need to transition away out of it. We can't transition out of it tomorrow, and we don't know exactly how to solve some of the problems for existing buildings in particular, but we do need to do that. And so we need to start building that industry capacity so that then we can take a 10-year-long program essentially to transition all buildings out of it. And governments are becoming aware of that, and that we're starting to see moves happen in that respect.
Yeah, thank you, George. We will come back on several other elements, and I would invite any one to ask any question if you think related to what the panel member is saying. If you have any question, please put up your hand. We'll give you the opportunity to talk, because then we can have the conversation around the same area, rather than moving into a different area and then coming back into. But it's still okay, even if you come up with a question later on to relate into something a panel member was talking, please feel free. Come up and put your hand up. We'll give you the opportunity to ask those questions. So on the same account, is there anything that you want to ask George or contribute to that discussion?
Sorry, I must admit that I'm struggling a little bit to hear very well the audio, because I'm picking it up from the room. So can you say again?
Yeah, no, I was asking whether there's any other questions, or any questions to ask you.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yes. Anybody has anything to suggest or say? Yeah, I'll just make a small comment on that. Basically, on the aspect of policy and directions, I think Navina presented a few key important documents in the morning presentation that the GBCA is involved in developing, as well as then subsequently various other institutions and other government related bodies are coming up. So, because of that, I think it is important for us to understand the broader context in there. One of the biggest elements that are there in here with regards to policy and directions, I think is the lack of standards in I'm more working on the embodied carbon and operation carbon estimating side. And one thing that coming up for us is that the lack of standards coming in, and then Javina pointed out the new standards going to be built up in CIB. George, would you be able to talk a little bit about CIB as those standards? Do you have any understanding of it?
Sorry, it's not necessarily the CEP that Davina was referring to, but rather another government project that's happening. But it answers your question regardless. The key issue that we're all working with in industry is through a partnership with Neighbours and the Green Building Council of Australia. We're essentially developing a Neighbours embodied carbon rating tool that has actually tries to address the issues that you've noted, right? So there is a distinct lack of benchmark data as to what you compare buildings to in Australia. There's a distinct lack of agreement in terms of where we get the data from in Australia for the different products and materials. And there's a distinct lack of agreement on boundaries for calculations and methodologies. The annoying thing about embodied carbon calculations is that the calculations themselves are very easy. The problem is that every assumption that you make about those calculations are the things that there's a lot of disparate opinions on how to get to that point. So what we're trying to do with Neighbours is to essentially have a nationally agreed framework and benchmarks and the modeling the guides so that everyone uses the same sort of set of metrics and so on. So when people tell me like addressing embodied carbon is impossible because we can't compare buildings against each other, that is right now very true. I don't expect that will be the case by the end of 2023. The way we're developing the program and the methodologies and benchmarks, they are being developed so that they can then be absorbed by policy instruments such as the National Construction Code, the State Environmental Planning Policy from New South Wales, or other policies in other states. But what we're trying to do is make sure that we're all talking about it, the problem the same way. Neighbours is actually going to be releasing a consultation paper on this project effectively in the next few weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And we'll have a consultation process of about 2 months to make sure that everyone is able to provide appropriate feedback to this. It is immensely important that people actually engage with this paper around embodied carbon because it will set the trajectories, benchmarks, and effectively the language that we will use in Australia to talk about how to reduce the upfront carbon emissions of buildings in Australia.
Thank you, George. I think, yeah, very good input from you. And I think it's good to understand that there are standards coming up and also the approach that you are talking about. One of the things that we from the academic side doing detailed analysis of this problem found that the inherent issue with embodied carbon data, the estimating is not difficult, as you said, this is correctly identified, but the problem is in the data sets. The data is static and our data is dependent on the energy profile of the manufacturer. And when the energy profile of the manufacturer changes, the data doesn't change at the moment. And that's where I see as the biggest issue, use of static data. I think we are coming up with technological advancements that we will be in a position to use dynamic data rather than static data. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more after going through the panel aspects, if I can later on bring into the discussion. Going on to Joe, you work in a large construction company built, and one of the roles that you play as the main person in charge of sustainability, you would be facing many challenges in implementing net zero or sustainable construction or reducing carbon emissions in what you do. What are the main challenges you see coming out for you, and how do you try to mitigate those challenges?
Okay, can you hear me? Do you want to hold this? Thanks very much, and thanks for having me on the panel. Can you hear me on the screen there, Jorge? Is that okay? Yeah, cool. What are the challenges? Hey, we recently had a session on circular economy. We had Professor Dr. Jacqueline Cromer out from Holland. And we said, how do we actually start a circular economy here in Australia? Like, what do we do to get going? And the first thing she said was, don't focus on the challenges. Because everybody gets caught up in the challenges and it stops people in their tracks. I'll give you a couple of quick challenges. One is the fact that I think all of us, if we're focused on net zero in the room, have been excited to see the rapid growth, the acceleration of renewables in the electricity grid. Are we all aware also that the global component of renewables in our energy mix is about 20% and has been for the last 20 years? Yeah. Because renewables have been additive, they haven't replaced. Okay, we live in an age where we're in a one-time fossil fuel carbon pulse. We're rapidly drawing down on this battery that took millions of years of the sun to create underground. We are drawing it down as if this was the norm. We've created economic models and ways of being and living, calculating from within this very system that is in fact a one-time pulse. We've got 500 billion extra workers, and the amount of work that fossil fuels do in the industry, like in our industry, 500 billion. We've got 5 billion human workers. Okay, so we're drawing down on this carbon and we will run out at some point and we will simplify. Carbon has allowed us to complexify our systems. We've got supply chains that are 6 continents long, including in our building industries, and we will necessarily need to contract. We'll do this the easy way or we do this the hard way. Right? The easy way is voluntarily. The hard way is just running straight into a cliff of, hey, no more cheap fossil fuel workers. So that's a big challenge. That's a huge challenge, right? I also, this is very dangerous, calling out professor's stats, but you said 40% of global emissions is the construction industry. I'd like to say it's the property industry. Okay, and they say 11% is in the embodied carbon and materials used in buildings, and then about 28% in the operational energy used in buildings. So again, not construction. I was starting to feel really guilty. But what we do have is an incredible opportunity in the construction sector, because we sit at the center of that supply chain. We've got clients come to us with their hopes and dreams and commercial feasibility studies to say, we want to build this building, whatever it is. I do a lot of commercial office, but it could be any kind of building. And then we mobilize that 6 continent long global supply chain to make that a reality. And ideally, with a lot of sustainability built into it. So our opportunity, right, is to guide our clients around circular. But they say that the greenest what is the one that you don't use. So and also the greenest building, okay, this is a builder's idea, is the building that you don't build. So first, refuse. Do we actually need this project? Secondly, reuse. Is there a building out there that we can actually repurpose for our needs? Third, let's not build the waste heaps of tomorrow, okay? So when we do build new, we really need to think about designing for disassembly, right? We need to think about how we're going to take that apart and repurpose it, designing for modularity. So that not only can it be disassembled, but it actually can practically be used in another endeavor. It's also about crowdsourcing information. I mean, I noticed there were a bunch of guys up here, but there are a lot of women in the room. And my team is actually all women besides me. And I got a lot of the good ideas from them. And one of the things I wanted to say that they've actually, you know, when I said, hey, here are the questions, how would you respond? One of the things that I love that they talk about is, you know, it can be overwhelming to completely shift an organization, let alone an entire industry. So let's take one initiative at a time. Let's prove the benefit to the business and garner that goodwill. I've been at Built for 10 years and I've had to take it slowly. And now, you know, we're out there promoting ourselves as sustainable building. We weren't when I started. Right? So it's one initiative at a time, prove the benefit, prove that there is a market differentiator in there. Because you, the young people, right, are demanding this of industry. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Any points anyone wants to raise to Joe on if there's anything, please let us know anyway. Yes, Ramesh.
Can I ask you a question now? You said that it's the best green building is the building that we never built. But the problem is we build too much, like we build more than what we need.
Yes.
So anyone has done any studies on how much we build, whether we need that square area or whatever? Because with the increasing population, if you look at the population growth, the amount of built area is exponentially increasing. So
Yes.
we build more than what we need. Say, for example, we have a 4-bedroom house, but we only need about 3 bedrooms or even 2 probably. Or if you look at an office building, part of the office building is empty.
Yes.
And also with post-COVID, it's going to be a reality.
Yes.
So what do you think about that? And also, I'm just wondering whether anyone has done any studies around the demand side of whether we are responding to the demand. Are we overbuilding? Is that part of the issue? I don't know. I'm just, it's a bit of a.
Love that question. Man, I really love it. Thank you. You're asking the right questions. And I think we talk about a standard of living. Okay. And I was actually talking to Luke about this before this session. We talk about a standard of living, but in circular economics, in the circular economy, the donut economics, we talk about decoupling economic growth, or let's not even use the word growth, but economic thriving from extraction of Earth's resources, right? Thriving, decoupling it from extraction, but rather trending towards regenerative materials, regenerative energy. I think the same thing can be said for a standard of living, which is by and large has been pegged towards increased consumption of materials and energy, right? And like you said, maybe it's chaining ourselves to a job that pays enough to afford that 4th bedroom, when in reality, maybe we only needed 3, and maybe a much smaller house, and maybe actually we could live with our mother-in-law, which I do, right? Because it means that you need less space per person, and then you get all the added benefits of the wisdom of an older generation in the house. I think there needs to be a shift in consciousness, right? And it sounds woo-woo, but the reality is there's an interconnection between all of Earth's living systems, and we ignore that to our peril. And I mean, look at COVID. People aren't talking about why. Well, why do we get this zoonotic disease? It came from animals. Well, it's because we are rapidly destroying habitat. We're pushing humans up closer and closer to animal habitat, wild animals, and there's a bit more of a transference. And lo and behold, you know, we get a animal-borne virus that takes over the world. So it's an absolutely crucial question to ask. How much do we need? Can we, in fact, start focusing more on mental health, physical health and well-being as a measure of standard of living rather than GDP consumption?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Thanks, Joe. I think we, as you said, the models of growth has always emanated on construction. Construction has always been used as an economic regulator in many ways. When a recession comes, we pump in money. Whether we need a building or not, we have to build something to it to go on. So as you said, there are some traditional assumptions about construction industry as a model. But going back to the disaster scenario, based on climate change, we have other issues coming up. The way we are building are not sustainable too. So they get destroyed. Then you have to rebuild, rebuilding the same place over and over again. And it may be a larger house than was before. And the whole thinking about quality of life, what it means to be a quality of life, and what it means to have something that is needed is gone out of probably Western development discourse. That's the biggest issue. We no longer have homes, we have houses which are driven with wealth. So the moment is more you accumulate the houses, you become more wealthier. So the model, particularly in Australia with negative gearing, are kind of pushing more building. And the other problem with construction is that there is a lead time. So speculation of demand generally pushes you to build before it's needed. And then particularly in some countries like China, you know that there's oversupply because based on that speculation. So it's a very interconnected, heavily politicized structure within construction. And I don't think we can solve it in a day, but as you said, it's about an individual tensions that's going to probably change the way we are looking at, do we need a 4-bedroom house? The recent disaster studies say the poverty and homelessness is increasing, but if you put all the additional bedrooms that people have across Australia, it's more than what you could to alleviate poverty and help people who have been in disasters. So it's a very different way to look at zero carbon, very different way to look at building, but I don't know whether we would have a quick answer for that.
I think a wonderful discussion on that. One thing I want to add there is we are living in an era of excessive living. Not the key thing is we are having too many things more than what we need, and every one of us are guilty about it, I guess, in one way or other. I cut off gas pretty much, and I'm now in 100% electric at home. So just trying to do a little bit in that way, we can contribute in some way. Just going on to I would like to move on to Uli. Net zero initiatives are quite challenging and bring up new challenges. There are new methodologies for carbon estimating and carbon assessment and things like that. New materials, tools, techniques continually come about. What are your observations of the industry adaptation of these new initiatives? And you have, I know, with the launch of your asset carbon calculator, you have come up with your own method of carbon estimating. And what do you see as the level of adoption of these technologies and demand for these technologies or these techniques? And what is your market perspective on that?
Thank you for that question. So my perspective on the construction industry is really, there's been a lot of significant uptake in technologies and approaches to tackle operational emissions, which has been the focus since, I guess, I've been in Australia 10 years and it's always been the focus. But now that is shifting towards embodied emissions because as we all know, the electricity grid is decarbonizing through increased penetration of renewables, and the scenarios are looking good, at least the scenarios pushed by the Australian government. They are telling us that the grid is going to decarbonize or achieve a good level of decarbonization by 2050, let's say. So that removes a lot of the pressure on the operational emissions from building, which is the largest share at the moment. And now that leaves us with embodied emissions, which is I would say the next frontier in terms of addressing getting to net zero. So embodied emissions, if you are across the term, it's just those emissions that are associated with the manufacture of materials, transportation of materials. Just to give you an example, there's embodied emissions in every single material here. As we speak, we've had to extract the silicon to produce that glass. and that glass has been transported here, and that generates emission as well. So there is a way to calculate those emissions, and as I said, it's becoming more and more significant now that operational emissions are just, I guess there's a solution in this. So I would say the industry is realizing about that now. Governments there's a lot of momentum happening in state government and nationally as well to, create policy just to reduce those emissions, develop adequate frameworks to measure it. As Jorge was saying, Neighbors and Great are doing amazing work in integrating those frameworks so that we have a consistent standard and we don't have to be, attacking this issue from different, using different approaches that may not be accepted in one organization and could be accepted in other. I guess in terms of the challenges that I see, the product that we developed is called Asset Impact, and it was initially developed to track embodied emissions in construction projects, and now we're expanding it to encompass all their ESG reportable metrics, at a portfolio level. So the challenges that we've experienced is basically, I'd say, three things: the data quality and transparency in the supply chain. That's been a huge issue. There's no really a method that would, tell your the builder, for example, not build the other builder, to actually, capture good data and tag that data so that we can use it for modeling purposes. So that is something that is going to take time. We understand that, but we don't start now. Then it's just going to be later. So that's one big issue. The other big challenge I see is the inconsistency of frameworks that now it's been addressed, but this story has been happening for 20 years, and Davina was mentioning that 20 years ago she actually tried to measure embodied emissions in a project, and nobody really paid attention, and also the tools that she had available at that time were very basic, and really not much has changed now, except that now there's additional tools that are being created as we speak, and that's really going to be beneficial. So that's the other big challenge that I see. And third, I would say innovations in materials, that we really need to find, I guess, innovative ways to decarbonize and come up with low carbon, low carbon versions of the materials we have now. So some manufacturers have been very proactive in that sense, but they sense the need, the signals in the market to actually come up with those materials. And I'm talking to you about the steel industry and the concrete industry in summary, which is the largest, I guess, share of embodied emissions in construction projects. So yeah, that's basically.
Can I just answer that question? Thanks for bringing up data transparency. It really is a big issue. I think there's a good news story though to tell everyone here. And we do a lot of life cycle assessment on our projects, including upfront embodied carbon analyses. In fact, I was working this morning for a tender that we're doing. Now, it isn't really yet the single metric that a building owner will make a decision, will make their sole decision on, but it's starting to be included in the factors that they consider, including time, quality, cost, and carbon. So that's exciting. Right. The other thing is, especially if you're talking about big buildings, we found in our studies approximately 80% of the upfront embodied carbon emissions, 80% comes from the product stage. So that's the fuel burn and extracting, transporting, and then manufacturing that product, or what they call cradle to gate, 80%. Okay, another approximately 15% will be in A4, transportation from gate of that factory in China or in Australia to the construction site, and about 5% in the A5 for the electricity and fuel used on site to install. Okay, now then of that 80% of the building's upfront embodied carbon, okay, about 65% of that figure comes from the concrete and steel, the substructure and superstructure. and then another 15% from the facade, okay? Now, concrete and steel here in Australia is pretty transparent in terms of the embodied carbon. Most large concrete suppliers have environmental product declarations or life cycle assessments on products. So we can get the carbon factor pretty reliably for about 65% of the, call it 80% of the building's upfront carbon emissions. Now that's a portion of a portion, but you can see there that we can take big slabs off embodied carbon simply by comparing two concrete mixes, two different types of reinforcing steel, two different types of structural steel. And the same goes for mass timber. If we actually take the flip and say we're going to start using biological materials in our buildings, because that's what we need to do for regenerative architecture, regenerative property sector, right? We have good environmental product declarations on those timber products. So the challenge back to those builders that you're finding untransparent is, hey, let me see the environmental product declarations on the concrete that you're proposing, on the steel you're proposing. And more on the facades, but facade is still a tricky one. Services is still a tricky one.
Thank you, Uli, and thank you, Joe. I think you brought up a very good few aspects in there. And I think just add to this a little bit by saying we've been working on dual currency estimating and that's been part of our work portfolio on research, coming up with methodologies for doing that. And I'm glad to say that we are working with KPMG at the moment to take that to the next level, including incorporating blockchain in so that we can securely estimate the carbon emissions and in a trustworthy manner without being dependent on various factors. But the point you said about EPD declarations is a very good one. That's a very good way to assess. However, the issue lies in there is in the point that Uli earlier mentioned about the carbon, it is dependent, the EPD is dependent on the power mix that the manufacturer uses, but the portfolio might change.
Agreed.
And when the portfolio changes, the EPD is not valid. And that's why we want to fix that gap with use of blockchain to capture dynamically. That's what I was talking about, dynamic data capture is important. And that we are working on some solution in there. But I want to go now on to another direction. To Gajendran, you've been, as far as I know, more than 20 years you've been in academia, working in various aspects of resilience, sustainability, and so on. So, in your view, what are the challenges that tertiary education has in introducing sustainability and upskilling the next generation and educating the next generation in doing this? Now, something I need to add to that here, my experience in the UK, I've been in the UK for 18 years and I've seen that how they tackle and make the whole society go with sustainability. So, for example, more than 10 years back, they took sustainability out of politics. Whereas in Australia, unfortunately, even it is part of the politics. And therefore, it is politically debated. But in the UK, it's no major party is taking it as a political point. Sustainability is accepted as an in principle to be something there. Of course, policy and things like that. How do you achieve sustainability? There are differences in that arguments. But what they did was they educated the society, the school, from school level, from university level. There was a huge education system that supported and took the society in a journey that society is much more sustainability conscious and aware in the UK when I compare to the Australian society broadly. Our councils, our society in general are not nowhere near in an index. I would say 50% less environmentally conscious compared to UK. So what do you think, I mean, that brings up new challenges?
Look, it's recorded, so I have to be careful what I say. I agree with you. I think we have been politically charged when it climate debate. We were kind of leading at one point in time when we were designated with policies that pretty much brought us back to 50 years back in terms of policy field. So as university educators, we have tried our best, depending on the schools and depending on the politics of the university, to embed sustainability for the last 20 years. So there has always been a sustainability focus in construction management education. But the problem was the political discourse. Grant funding for research was really influenced by at that time what the politician thought, because the minister has to sign off on every government grant that goes on to research, and anything that you do probably that might have seen as a problem at that for the political discourse, whether climate denial or the other way around, it influences. So you're right, that's one of the problems. And I think UK got rid of coal a long time ago. So it was never part of its economy. If you take Australia, still extractive resources are the key one. So if you talk about the regional towns, their livelihood is on that. So politically, you're not supposed to talk. Even Newcastle is one of them. Now only we are talking about renewable energies a lot in our university side. So because of that, the education system within those parameters was struggling to bring certain aspects. And on top of it, the policies, the tools, and everything has to come there to educate. Now we can invent things, but if the industry doesn't use it, our graduates become obsolete. So what we have done very carefully over the years is to embed sustainability. So all the rating tools were taught. So mostly we looked at operational carbon. That was our, I think, remit. The other one was we were really educating in terms of whether your program is activism-based or science-based. If it's science-based, you go for tools, rating, measurements. If it's activism-based, exactly the things that we talked about. Why do you need a big house? Some of the architecture school went to that level of discourse to reduce consumption. So sustainability was seen as a mechanism to reduce carbon emissions, but not directly, but it was seen as reducing consumption of resources for future generations. That's going to reduce carbon emissions. The problem now we have is that it's not working, and that discourse is not going well. So we need to measure and kind of tell people, you are really doing bad things. So we need to change. As educators in construction management, we have project managers, building surveyors, and quantity surveyors, all sorts of professions needs tools to go and change the sector. First, demand-driven, actually, clients have to agree. Then if the clients agree, then that we should have the skill set to execute it. So where we are going is that I think there's a human tendency to wait till the last minute to do everything. So this is last minute for most people. So in 2020 net zero, 30-year building life cycle, we need to have graduates and skill sets in the next 5 to 6 years to deal with that. In 5 to 6 years, changing a major discourse within construction is hard. But what I'm optimistic about is that our sustainability agenda and our digital agenda and all those things that have been helping us to transform our curriculum could easily embed zero carbon techniques too. So Neighbors and Green Star and all of them have been built into education. But the problem is embodied carbon, as we said, and who makes the decisions, who is going to control it, which designers are going to be in the driving seat, or other quantity surveys going to be in the driving. These will change the content of the curriculum. So that's one of the challenges we have, the accrediting bodies. I think RICS is a bit ahead, I think, in terms of carbon accounting. So we need to have a broader discourse, because it's still a picture, because of state policies, the national policies, and everything needs to align for us to give a very cohesive training to upskill. Okay? But if you want to give a discourse about the issues, yes, we can teach you. But if you want to really target skill sets, we need more from policies, tools, and standards. So that's about curriculum design. But I think the other one is industry. Industry is actually driving a lot of things, and transitional research is becoming very important, not basic research for us. What it means is what you're doing, your case studies are the one which is going to be the standard in the future to build up. So if companies are not going to give data, companies are a bit nervous about it, then we are going to be behind further. So the transparency is important, but getting data from the industry for us to get the practices running, teach students these are the best case studies, this is what's happening. So we need to do more collaboration. So I don't see them as challenges, but I see them as future training for students and academics to work carefully to renew their curriculum. Then the accreditation company, the accreditation already students complain there's too much content in a 4-year degree. So if you're going to add these things, are they going to be transformational, integrated changes or additional content? So these are the educators' challenges, I would say, for the next couple of years. And we have 4 years, 5 years to come up with something that to deal with the net carbon zero agenda.
Can I ask a question on that point?
Yeah, great points.
You mentioned that if the industry doesn't use the tools that you develop and teach your students here, the graduates are obsolete. And that makes me feel really kind of sad because I didn't go to university for a job. I went to university so I could learn how to think differently. And I think that if students are coming to universities with the end goal of getting a job and what the economy and the industries that are existing say they need is what drives what we teach our young people, we're never going to extract ourselves from the very systems that are putting us in this pickle.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, but unfortunately, I completely agree with you. So our philosophy on problem-based learning is thinkers, problem solvers. The activism-based education is about challenging the status quo. But what we have realized is that every time we have an industry advisory panel, it's content-driven discussions. It's about skill set that's needed immediately in the need of the sector to solve problems. So what over a period of time, the thinking and also work integrated learning, industry-ready graduates, all the government packages are kind of driving towards a bit of a different narrative to the narrative about education that existed probably 15, 20 years ago. So I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying is that now if you're a graduate, you should be economically productive. So that's the distortion.
And I graduated in construction management too. So I had a technical based degree, but I'm still, I'm working.
Well, I agree with you completely. I would love to go
We've
back.
got to start here, right? We've got to start here for solve the world. Think about things.
It's a great point, and there is some level of dissemination that we do now. I always try to bring the research elements I work on a little bit into the teaching that I do where possible. And an example of that was 11 years ago, I brought carbon estimating into teaching undergraduates, quantity surveying undergraduates. Because quantity surveyors do the measurement of the building components. It's a matter of adding carbon. It's a dead simple thing for them to do. So I introduced that, and they started using. And the consequence of that is they don't become experts in carbon estimating by the time they go, but they become aware of this can be done. There are methods available. There are data sets like this available. There are tools and techniques available, and they become a little bit aware of that. And when they go into the industry, they can start bringing that little bit. I'm glad to say that a lot of consulting companies in the UK, larger consulting companies, they do dual currency estimates. So the cost line is down. This one column is cost, the other column is carbon. So that's there in practice. So that's the kind of thing that we would like to see here, which is not happening. When I talk to the large consulting companies, they are saying that it's not happening at the moment right now, might be coming into the future.
It's starting to shift, and we're hearing all of the major QS companies, Slattery, WTs, all of them are starting to offer carbon planning services.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it makes sense. They've got the bill of quantities.
Yes.
You apply a carbon factor, there's your carbon budget.
Yes. Thank you. And I'll open up to the audience. Please, if you have any burning question, issue, related thing, please come up.
Just one thing about Norway and Australia. Norway is also heavily, I think I would like to hear your opinions. Norway is a heavily fossil fuel exporting country, but they are the top in zero carbon agenda. And that shows the political and the people's willingness and the whole thinking. So that really frustrates me at times. We might be equivalent to Norway when it comes to what we rely on the current economy, but the future thinking, future focus was very different in Europe compared to us. And we are a larger continent. That's the other one too. Connecting us is it's hard to do with zero carbon. I would say roads, bridges, and everything, and particularly cement. But the manufacturing sector, we had a forum last week on zero carbon, and manufacturing sector is really working hard in terms of carbon and steel, and they are getting really good results. And hopefully, we can cut that major embodied carbon through those two products.
Yeah, okay, right.
And there's this very simple question. Many years ago, I heard the expression building without oil, building without carbon. And just what your thoughts on that? We did make a comment earlier that we are going to get a brick wall, we're going to run out of carbon fuels. Of course, we're going to then run out of ways to make conventional plastics, which we know are also environmental disaster. I'd just like to know your thoughts. Where do you see the industry maybe in 50 years when we decide that we have much better alternatives to with materials to replace like coatings, for example, or the polymers like sealants and the off-gassing. So just love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Look, I think that we are going to simplify. I don't think that we're going to continue drawing down resources at the rate that we currently are. But I was just over in the States, and that was a fossil fueled trip in a plane. But I went to Greenbuild, and there's some really exciting things happening with hemp fiber, as an example. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's in fact hemp reinforcement. So they can replace reinforcement steel with hemp. There is, in its infancy kind of thing right now, there is mycelium mushroom being used as insulation materials, acoustic and thermal, starting to be used for structural purposes, bricks and so forth. More and more timber mass plywood instead of CLT, which is evidently a more economical use of the timber, mass plywood. There is Bamcore, which is a product that is structural engineered bamboo. So we're starting to see a lot of these regenerative products. Now, I think that we need to address the point of, hey, let's not build what we don't need. So we need to massively scale back our expectations in terms of consumption per person. That's fine, we can do that. The other point, though, that is tricky is we use plastics in most things. Now, plastics come as a result of the refining process of a barrel of crude. Okay, so without extracting oil and producing kerosene, butane, gasoline, diesel, okay, and then the lubricants and plastics, we can't do it. We can use a shitload of energy and do hydroreforming, and you can create plastics that way. There's bioplastics, but there's going to be a trade-off for how much we produce relative to agricultural area and the nourishment we extract out of the land to feed enough people, right? So we're coming up against this carrying capacity issues around Earth. And so I think that we're going to solve that in two ways. We are going to move towards a circular and regenerative economy. We are going to shrink our expectations of consumption. And I think that population is also going to necessarily reduce. And we're going to get back to a much more local and connected way of living, where I won't be jet setting over to the States to hear about a new product. I'll be, using what's locally available in my community. It also means seeing my family less over there.
This great discussion, unfortunately, on time is catching up. So I would rather like some closing statements from each of the panelists, starting with George. George, do you have some closing remarks that you want to add into this discussion?
I think for everyone, the key thing that I'd like to say is this is a space that's moving incredibly quickly. The conversations that we're having right now are 3 or 4 times as sophisticated and full of knowledge as we were having them 2 years ago. And that's important to recognize. This is moving quickly. It is important to keep yourself informed of what's going on in industry, and to keep plugged in with the work that's happening, either say by private entities like the ones that are represented in your panel, or academics, or the work that not-for-profits or industry associations like ourselves are doing. And I would once again like to make a plug for the consultation paper that Neighbors will be putting out soon. It is genuinely important that you engage with that paper, and I strongly encourage that you do when it comes out.
Thank you, George. Can I go to Joe for some concluding remarks?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the panel. I'll keep it brief because I've spoken a lot. I'm hugely heartened by the work of Kate Rayworth and circular or donut economics and all the circular economy stuff. So I'd invite you to check out donut economics, check out the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation around circular economy, because I truly think that that can help start to shine a light on the path forward.
Thank you. I would like just to invite everyone to just walk the talk, and as Jorge said, just keep yourselves informed. It's very easy to just place the responsibility on institutions or government or the company or corporations, but really carbon emissions is something that we are generating throughout our just as we operate as humans, I guess, like food and products we consume. So it's really important that we are just consistent and aware that this is something that is really happening. It's started, in the past we would say, well, my children, I just want them to be in a better world, but now it's really happening to us. You can see through the floods in Australia has been, especially New South Wales, massively affected by floods, bushfire. We had the dark summer 2 years ago here, which was devastating. So we're really seeing this issue in our lifetime. It is very important that we just, I guess it's just a call to action for everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I mean, I think you've covered most of the thing. I want to say circular economy is one key thing we want to build into education and also resilience to climate, so adaptation and mitigation. So I'm excited in a way that current carbon counting discourse, as Jose said, that it's really complex. It's really moving very fast. We may not get it 100% to students to understand everything, but what it's very important is that we put them in the right trajectory towards a net zero world, which will probably solve a lot of the other things that we talked about, and particularly disasters, climate change impacts. So I'm looking forward to look at an educational transformation that is underpinned by this boldly rather than covertly looking sustainability as a way to solve the problem.
Thank you very much for the panel members, and we had a very engaging discussion. I hope the audience here online as well benefited from it. I will give one last opportunity for one last question from anyone. Is there? Then if not, we'll close down the session. Okay, so it is, yeah.
I must apologize. Sorry, with apologies, I really have to go now, so I must apologize and duck out. Sincere apologies. I'm double booked.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Good. Thank you so much, panel members. I think the discussion is so so critical for our future construction industry, future industry. I come from the engineering side. I am a structural engineer. I know you mentioned about the embodied carbon is mostly come from the construction materials, steels, concrete. I think you also mentioned about that there are some replacement in the future is coming. Do you think as an engineer or from the engineering profession, are we doing fast enough, to invent new materials, and that will have eventually have a positive impact in terms of reduce the carbon footprint?
The question for Joe?
For
First. Yeah, I'll go first. So I would say that as you know, with every shift from business as usual, it always takes time, and there's always a learning curve. And if you don't have the right policy setting for that, you know, to facilitate that environment, it just complicates things. But fortunately now I can see that the policies is going right. They it's actually making its way into a legislation, and I think that's going to be a big driver for, because that's the signal that manufacturers needed to really make the investments that they have to make, so that you know they come up with the innovation in materials. There's a lot of biomaterials that are being developed. Very insightful here about pen being something that was pushed back in the 60s. So the bad connotation it had, now it's just coming back into the scene and being savior. So it's just exciting, I think. So.
Yeah, I've got a really quick point to make, which is that, you know, they've had over 100 years to zero in on plastics and to really get them working for all sorts of things, fabrics and Kevlar, bulletproof vests, and you name it, right? My daughter has plastic in her heart and to keep the blood flowing. So plastics have come a really long way, but over 100 years. There's a company in the UK called Deuterium, which is using AI to advance the, I guess, the proliferation of bioplastics or biological replacements for plastics in 10 years rather than 100. And we need more innovations like that to really just fast track so that we can scale out. Another interesting thing that I heard about was the use of seaweed. Seaweed's incredibly, the plastic replacement, and it's incredibly prolific. It's all around the world, right? But the characteristics of seaweed change from place to place. And whereas traditional engineering says, well, we need a homogeneous substance to create a homogeneous output, well, we actually need, rather than scaling up, we need to scale out so that we can accommodate differences in characteristics based on that local material makeup, right? And we can in fact replace very homogeneous materials with heterogeneous materials.
Yeah, just a simple thing. One economist said we are blamed for everything, but he said we have the tools to solve the problems. If you have priced carbon from the beginning, new innovation would have made it. So the problem is more than the innovation, the incentive for the innovation. So as long as either markets have to create the incentives, or the policy, as you said, or standards have to create. Market struggle over the last 50 years or 40 years. So it's the policy that's going to drive innovation.
That I think sums up our session. Thank you very much, and a big round of applause to. Thank you very much.
Can you also take
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intro.